Why would he want the landing gear down during the flight?
I believe that the reason he wanted it down is it more or less enabled him to control the speed of the jet. I mean, as it was traveling about 200 miles an hour, which is a reasonably violent jump. It's not going to kill you, but it's a reasonably violent jump. And obviously having the landing gear down ensures that the pilots, decided not to jack with the guy and, go tooling out at 500 miles an hour. And, obviously no one's going to survive that kind of a jump. So I suspect that's part of it.
Wow. So who are the main suspects now? Have they completely dropped this? Is the FBI done with this completely? They've closed that case and they're not worried about it anymore?
Well, here's the breaking news with all of this. They actually did close the case in July of 2016, but recently they basically restarted the case, reopened the case. And that's because in March of last year, I filed a lawsuit requesting access to a clip-on tie, a skinny black clip-on tie that he left behind, because there's a particular part of that tie that I identified that nobody else realized existed that may contain a complete DNA profile for D.B. Cooper. So it appears that the FBI, I was asking for access to the tie to have a DNA specialist look at that. Took it to court. I ended up losing, but basically I was asking for access. But it appears that part of the reason why the FBI pushed back so hard on this is because they actually decided to test the tie themselves.
That might be a good idea.
So they actually have reactivated the case recently in the last 6 months, as far as I understand.
So have they tested the tie then?
Do we
know
have any
about
documentation on that?
They have not said anything about it, but if you read the tea leaves, it's pretty clear that they tested the part of the tie, this little metal spindle that I was referencing in my lawsuit, that they actually did get a DNA profile, and they have actually retested some of the DNA from some of the primary suspects that they had looked at previously, specifically 2004. So that may be the extent of their 2023/2024 investigation. I don't know, but it's pretty clear that none of those suspects actually match the new profile that they have on hand, the new DNA profile. So with respect to what the FBI is doing at this point, I really don't know. I'm just not certain.
Well, the clip-on tie would give you a clue that he's not exactly a fashion aficionado. He had really bad taste in clothing,
this
so
was
we know that.
That's a good look. What are you talking about?
Clip-on ties have never been a good look, unless you're 3. Then it's fairly acceptable. All right, so in the following 53 years, they've compiled virtually no other new information about this than they originally had?
They basically came up with very little, but I want to say there was an FBI agent, a guy named Larry Carr, who was heading the investigation around the 2007 timeframe, and he actually decided to think outside the box with respect to this. And he opened up the case to a certain degree and put a lot of information out there to the public. And that got a lot of people like myself who were just sort of private citizens who thought, you know what, I think I can figure out who this guy was. And since that point in 2007, there's actually quite a bit we've learned about the guy, specifically because we've had access to the tie, that clip-on tie in the past, and we put it under an scanning electron microscope. And there are particles and things on there that appear to indicate that this guy worked for a specialty metals company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. So there actually is a lot that we've learned recently, not the DNA notwithstanding.
What was it that got you interested in this case initially? How did you come to follow this?
You know what? It's one of those things where I always kind of knew of the case. I mean, I think I probably first learned of it in the late 70s. And it's just one of those things that's kind of in the back of my mind. And I was one of those guys that tried to, figure out the Rubik's Cube and all that kind of thing. And at some point about 15 years ago, I thought, you know what? This case is still unsolved. I bet you I could figure out who this guy was. And it just started out as like a guilty pleasure, a personal challenge. And it just kind of morphed into something, much bigger accidentally over time.
Wow. And there's been a lot of people, I think you mentioned that there are people who just become fascinated with this and start chasing it down, thinking they're the ones who are going to uncover who D.B. Cooper really was. Because first of all, that wasn't even his actual name, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting truth in the story. This is 1971, where you go to the ticket counter, you give any kind of name you want.
Airports
There's no
were
identification
completely
required.
different.
There's no TSA or anything.
Yeah.
And he gave the name Dan Cooper to the ticket agent. So the ticket was written out to a Dan Cooper. The thing is that right after the skyjacking took place, the media accidentally started reporting his name as DB Cooper. Somebody overheard the wrong name or something. And the authorities pretty quickly realized, and the media realized, no, it's not DB Cooper, it's Dan Cooper. But it's like I said before, DB is just a more badass name.
Yeah, it's
so
too
we
late.
just stuck. So we've been rolling with that for the last 53 years.
We're speaking
That's
with
tremendous.
Eric Ulis about the DB Cooper situation. He's got a fascinating documentary on Netflix about it.